should have ended up together. We should have had a huge smashing affair. But there was no time, and Julie had her children with her, which is most inconvenient, I thought.
Before he died, Christopher Plummer revealed the truth about Julie Andrews. He spent decades joking that he hated the movie that made him famous. He even had a nickname for it that was too rude to say on television. But when it came to the woman who starred beside him, Christopher Plummer never once made a joke that sounded like it was covering something up. And in the years before he died, he said something about Julie Andrews that fans still bring up today. Not a scandal, not a secret affair, but something quieter and, in its own way, more remarkable. A friendship that lasted 55 years and never once broke down. To understand why that friendship mattered so much to both of them, you have to go back to 1964, to a soundstage, and later the hills outside Salzburg, where two actors who barely knew each other were about to become the most famous on-screen couple of their generation. Christopher Plummer was already a respected name in theater when he was cast as Captain George Von Trapp. He was known for Shakespeare, for a string of serious stage roles, and for a reputation as a serious, somewhat prickly actor who didn't think much of Hollywood musicals. Julie Andrews, on the other hand, was riding the wave of Mary Poppins, a role that had just made her a household name and would soon win her an Academy Award. On paper, they were an unlikely pair, a classically trained stage actor who considered himself above material, and a rising film star associated with cheerful, wholesome family entertainment. By his own account, Plummer wasn't thrilled to be there. He had taken the role partly because he thought it would help him train his voice for a stage production of Cyrano de Bergerac he hoped to do later on, and partly because the money was good. He was, in his own words years later, a young actor who had grown a little arrogant from too many good notices in the theater, and he carried some of that snobbery about film work onto the set in Austria. He complained to reporters at the time that he found the character a little dull, and he never fully shook that feeling. For most of his life afterward, he refused to even say the film's real title in interviews, calling it That Movie, or joking that it should have been called The Sound of Mucus. None of that irritation, though, extended to his co-star. Whatever Plummer thought about the songs, the sentimentality, or the 11 long days of filming in the Austrian Alps, he was consistent about one thing across nearly 6 decades of interviews. Working with Julie Andrews was the best part of the experience, and it wasn't close. The two met for the first time in the summer of 1964, when filming began. Both of them were going through difficult periods in their personal lives. Andrews was in the middle of a marriage that had grown strained, missing her young daughter back home, and working long hours far from familiar surroundings. Plummer was also in a marriage that wouldn't last, and by his own admission in his memoir, he handled the stress of it by drinking heavily during the shoot and spending his nights off playing piano in hotel bars to blow off steam. Two people carrying that kind of weight, thrown together for months of location filming, found something in each other that had nothing to do with the script. A person who understood exactly what the other one was going through. That understanding showed up on screen. The famous ballroom scene, where Captain Von Trapp and Maria dance the Landler and realize they're falling for each other, is remembered as one of the most tender moments in the film, and much of that came from two actors who genuinely liked and trusted one another, not from a director's blocking notes. Andrews has said in later interviews that she found Plummer intimidating at first, given his stage pedigree and reputation, and that she wondered how she would ever measure up to an actor of his caliber. That early nervousness didn't last. Within weeks, cast and crew noticed the two of them settling into an easy rhythm together, trading jokes between takes, needling each other about the material, and generally acting like people who had known each other far longer than a few months. One detail that says a lot about their dynamic involves the music itself. Plummer wanted to sing his own parts and had been working on his voice specifically for the role. In the end, though, most of his singing in the film was dubbed by another performer because, as Plummer explained plainly in a later NPR interview, Andrews' voice was simply extraordinary, and matching it note for note was more than his voice could manage on its own. He wasn't bitter about it. He treated it as a simple fact about the gulf between his singing ability and hers, and the entrances and exits of certain songs were his real voice blended with the dub sections. Both actors later admitted, on more than one occasion, that they had feelings for each other during filming that went beyond ordinary professional friendliness. Neither of them has ever hidden this or dressed it up as some tragic, unspoken secret. In a joint interview with Diane Sawyer for an ABC News special marking the film's 50th anniversary, Plummer said, half joking and half serious, that the two of them probably should have ended up together and had a proper love affair, except there simply wasn't time for it. Andrews had her children with her on set, and the practical realities of two working parents in the middle of a demanding shoot got in the way of anything more happening. Andrews, for her part, has confirmed there was a mutual attraction. She is called a crush, but she's also been clear and consistent that nothing ever came of it romantically. She has said plainly that they were never a couple, and that not becoming one may be exactly why their friendship worked so well for the rest of their lives. In her words, they became the best of friends, and that was lovely, possibly because they weren't ever an item. That distinction matters, because it's the opposite of a hidden, unresolved romance. It's two people who recognized a spark, talked about it honestly, chose friendship instead, and then spent 55 years proving that the choice was the right one. There was no lingering tension between them, no unfinished business hanging over their later interactions. When asked directly whether there had ever been friction between them, Andrews has said there wasn't, not one cross word. In her own description, across all the years, they knew each other. Once filming wrapped in 1965, their careers moved in different directions almost immediately. Plummer went back to the stage, where he felt most at home, building a career that eventually spanned Shakespeare, film dramas, and small character roles. He said he far preferred to playing conventional leading men. Andrews continued in film and music, though her career took an unexpected turn a few years later when she underwent surgery to remove non-cancerous nodules from her vocal cords, an operation that permanently changed her singing voice and which she has described as one of the most painful losses of her professional life. Despite living on opposite coasts and working in very different corners of the entertainment industry, Plummer and Andrews kept finding their way back to each other. They appeared together at anniversary screenings and film festival tributes for The Sound of Music, sat for joint interviews decades apart, and by all accounts picked up their old rapport instantly every time. In a joint interview with Vanity Fair around the film's 50th anniversary in 2015, the writer covering them described the two as having the easy, well-worn banter of an old married couple, not because anything romantic was happening, but because their comfort with each other had only deepened with age. They joked about Plummer's complaints regarding the film, laughed about their younger selves, and generally behaved like two people who had shared something neither of them needed to explain to anyone else. It's worth pausing on how differently the two of them talked about their careers versus how they talked about each other. Plummer, for most of his life, kept a wary distance from the sound of music itself. He resented being defined by a single role, felt the film was overly sentimental for his taste, and made no secret of his frustration that it followed him everywhere he went, long after he'd built an enormous and varied body of work in theater and film, including an Academy Award late in his career for beginners. Yet, whenever the conversation turned specifically to Andrews rather than the film, his tone changed completely. Interviewers over the decades noticed it. The sarcasm dropped away, and what was left was plain admiration. He didn't reserve that same warmth for the movie's music or its studio-mandated sentimentality. He reserved it specifically for her. Andrews, in turn, never let anyone reduce their relationship to gossip or speculation. When interviewers pressed her about rumors of an affair or tried to frame their bond as some hidden scandal, she consistently corrected the record rather than letting the mystery sit unaddressed, an odd thing to do if there had been anything to hide. She spoke about him instead as someone who had known her at a vulnerable point in her career and life, when she was still relatively new to Hollywood, raising a young daughter, and adjusting to a level of fame she hadn't fully anticipated after Mary Poppins. That kind of witness, someone who saw you before you'd figured everything out and stuck around afterward, is a specific and real kind of intimacy, even without romance attached to it. Their friendship kept going through the more difficult chapters of both of their lives. Andrews later married director Blake Edwards and remained married to him until his death in 2010, a loss she has spoken about with real grief. Plummer went through 2 shorter marriages before meeting Elaine Taylor, An actress and dancer he married in 1970. That marriage lasted more than 4 decades, until his death, and he described it in his memoir as the steadiest relationship of his life. Through all of these different chapters, new marriages, children, career shifts, loss, Andrews and Plummer stayed in each other's lives. Not constantly, and not as some dramatic ongoing saga, but reliably, the way old friends do, catching up at industry events, exchanging warm words in interviews, showing up for each other at milestone celebrations tied to the film that started it all. In 2022, Andrews was honored with the American Film Institute's Life Achievement Award, and several of her surviving Sound of Music co-stars, the actors who had played the Vaughn trapped children decades earlier, surprised her on stage. Speaking about the reunion afterward, Andrews reflected on how tightly that cast had stayed bonded over the years, joking that they weren't in constant weekly contact, but that they came together for holidays, birthdays, and reunions, and that in her words, the years of shared work had essentially made them family. By that point, Plummer had already passed away, but his presence in her memories of that era was clearly still there. Christopher Plummer died at his home in Connecticut on February 5, 2021, at the age of 91, following a fall. He had continued working almost to the very end of his life, including an unusual, high-profile role in 2017 when he stepped in on short notice to replace another actor in a completed film after a sexual misconduct scandal forced the production to reshoot every one of that actor's scenes. Even in his 90s, Plummer was still regarded as one of the most reliable, technically gifted actors of his generation, someone directors trusted to walk onto a set and deliver, no matter how little time they gave him. When the news of his death broke, Julie Andrews released a statement that captured, in a few plain sentences, exactly what their decades-long friendship had meant to her. She said the world had lost a truly great actor, and that she personally had lost a cherished friend. She said she would treasure the memory of their work together, along with all the humor and the fun they had shared through the years. It wasn't a statement full of mystery or hinted at secrets. It was warm, direct, and grateful, the kind of tribute one close friend gives another after a lifetime of knowing them. In the months and years since, Andrews has continued to speak fondly about Plummer whenever his name has come up in interviews. She has described their bond as one that lasted until his passing, noting that they saw each other regularly over the decades and that their friendship, in her words, was simply very pleasant, an unglamorous but telling word choice for a relationship people have spent years trying to turn into something more dramatic. She has made a point more than once of pushing back against any attempt to reduce their connection to gossip, insisting instead on describing it in the plainest possible terms. Two people who worked together once, liked each other enormously, and never stopped. So what was the truth that Christopher Plummer revealed before he died? Not a secret love affair kept hidden for half a century. Not a forbidden romance finally confessed on his deathbed. The truth he told, consistently across interview after interview in his later years, was simpler and in some ways harder to fake. That meeting Julie Andrews on the set of a film he didn't even want to make turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened to him professionally and personally. That the two of them had genuinely fallen for each other a little during filming, that they had both been honest about it at the time, and that they had deliberately chosen a lifelong friendship over a fling that circumstances made impossible anyway. That choice, repeated and reaffirmed by both of them for 55 years, is arguably a more impressive love story than any secret romance could have been, because it required both of them to keep choosing it, decade after decade, long after the cameras had stopped rolling and there was nothing left to perform for anyone. It's easy to understand why audiences want there to be more to the story. The chemistry between Maria and Captain Von Trapp on screen is real and affecting, and it's natural to wonder whether something like that has to be rooted in an off-screen romance to feel that genuine. But Plummer and Andrews themselves never encouraged that reading, and in fact spent plenty of interviews gently correcting it. What they described instead, two people who admired each other deeply, admitted an early attraction honestly, and then built something more durable out of mutual respect and decades of loyalty, doesn't need embellishing to be a remarkable story. If anything, the ordinariness of it, the fact that they simply stayed friends and meant it, is what makes their bond worth remembering. To really appreciate how unusual their friendship was, it helps to look and how differently each of them handled fame afterward. The Sound of Music went on to become the highest-grossing film of its era, eventually overtaking Gone with the Wind at the box office, and it swept the Academy Awards, winning Best Picture along with 4 other Oscars, including one for its director, Robert Wise. For most actors, being part of a cultural phenomenon like that would be an unambiguous career highlight. For Plummer, it was complicated. He felt boxed in by the role of the stern, buttoned-up naval captain, worried that audiences would never see him as anything else, and spent years afterward deliberately choosing roles that had nothing to do with singing families or wholesome musicals, just to prove to himself and to casting directors that he was capable of far more. He took pride in eventually becoming what he called a character actor rather than a conventional leading man, telling interviewers late in life that he was relieved to no longer have to worry about how he looked on camera, and that character work suited his temperament far better than being someone's romantic lead.